It's yet another week without a Nintendo Switch Online announcement. Yeah, that sucks, but don't worry, because we still have a lot of 8 and 16-bit games that haven't been featured in our Review Crew series. These games include some of Nintendo's most iconic characters, such as Yoshi, Kirby's Adventure, and Zelda II, The Adventure of Link. These are 3 classic games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but are any of them worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Computer and Video Games, The Games Machine, and more old-school magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Oh boy, I sure hope you're ready to lay some eggs, because this is an episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew that is guaranteed to suck.
Tiens, c'est le jeu Kirby de Nintendo.
C'est Kirby, ça? Je le pensais super puissant. Il a l'air d'une mauviette.
Pour combattre ses ennemis, Kirby les aspire.
Voir si ce tata-là est capable de faire ça.
Kirby?
2 aventures Kirby sur Game Boy et système Nintendo.
Le jeu, c'est sérieux.
Where most games start out on the Nintendo Entertainment System before getting scaled down to the Game Boy, the opposite was true for Kirby. This is the rare example of a portable release that ended up getting a more ambitious sequel on home consoles. Released only 9 months after Kirby's Dream Land won over fans and critics, Kirby's Adventure took the platforming series one step further by adding color and more levels. Best of all, it's the game that introduced Kirby's ability to gain new powers by sucking up different bad guys, a staple of the series. Look, we already know that most of the critics were completely won over by Kirby's charm on the Game Boy. Does that transfer over to the NES? In the case of Electronic Gaming Monthly, that question's a little hard to answer since they didn't bother reviewing Kirby's Dream Land. Of course, that didn't stop them from raving about Kirby's Adventure, without asking the age-old question, can Nintendo pick winners or what? Kirby's Adventure is an absolute blast to play. Kirby's ability to acquire techniques from eaten enemies is fantastic. Perfect play control and many levels are the icing on the cake. SushiX agreed, but had a question of his own. Did anyone call Weight Watchers? Kirby just keeps eating his way to the spotlight each time. Each area is limited in size, but you must use your noggin as well as your dexterous digits to win. Excellent gameplay really rounds this title out. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave Kirby an average score of 8.25 out of 10. Now, when it comes to Nintendo Magazine System, they gave Kirby's Adventure a score of 93%, which is just one tick under the 94% they gave Kirby's Dream Land. A similar thing happened over at Nintendo Power, once again giving a Kirby game a 4 out of 5. For their part, Computer and Video Games went even higher, giving this NES game a score of 89%. They concluded that Kirby has so many elements, sub-levels, and general cuteness that it really is an unmissable game. My only criticism is that the main sprite is too small and as such tends to get lost during the more hectic levels. Definitely the best NES game so far this year. As expected, the highest score comes from GamePro, who gave the game a perfect 5 out of 5. They argued that Kirby's Adventure is as good as the 8-bit Mario games, which is great news for NES owners. Now, instead of looking longingly at the 16-bit systems, you can look in wonder upon the marvels of Dreamland, a place of endless fun and adventure. They ended their review by proclaiming that Kirby's Adventure is one of the best 8-bit games ever. Look, this game is fun, I'll admit, but I'm not sure I'd put it on the same level as Mario. Go ahead and give it a play on the Switch and see if you agree with me. When you hear that Nintendo has a game starring Yoshi, you probably think of all the platforming perils a dinosaur can get into. Well, don't get too excited, because the game Yoshi is a poorly received puzzle game that has very little to do with Mario's prehistoric best friend. To To be fair to Nintendo, slapping a popular star on an unrelated puzzle game is definitely something they love to do. I mean, just look at Dr. Mario, Kirby's Avalanche, and Pokemon Puzzle League. Of course, those games sound like spin-offs, while Yoshi sets you up that it's going to be a flagship action game. Look, perhaps I'm making too much about this, but this is one of those titles that's just always felt misleading to me. And you know what? I'm not alone. Electronic Gaming Monthly was also annoyed by both the name and the puzzle game. Giving it a 4 out of 10, Ed puts it this way: I am not impressed. Although the main character is different, whether it's Yoshi, Dr. Mario, or Tetris, Nintendo continues to beat this old theme to death while hoping to get players to buy games based on a popular character. If you're hard up for a new puzzle game, wait a while, as something good will be coming out. Martin liked the game a bit more, giving it a 6 out of 10, but preferred the handheld version. Like Tetris, the Game Boy version played better. The colored graphics are cute and the sound is a little different, but overall, the game lost a bit in translation. An above-average puzzler, though, the average score disagrees, coming in at a 5 out of 10. Now, in case you were hoping that Nintendo Power would come in and save the day, think again. Not only did they give the game a 3.8 out of 5, but they didn't even bother writing a review to justify their score. Thankfully, that wasn't a problem at GamePro. Giving it a score of 3.5 out of 5, they concluded that players in search of another fast-paced, brain-burning puzzler should consider giving Yoshi a call. The cart won't have you seeing stars, but it's a nice tide-me-over for a Tetrisized gamer on the prowl for a new NES challenge with a Mario twist. In other words, this is one of those games that you can probably skip on the Nintendo Switch.
昔々よしはクリボーおまけいかげそう積み上げて重ねて挟んで生まれたよ
重ねて挟んでヨッシー誕生。ヨッシーのパズルゲーム、ファミコンソフトヨッシーの卵。
ゲームボーイも出たよ。
While I wouldn't go as far as to call The Adventure of Link the black sheep of the Legend of Zelda series, it's definitely a sequel that bucks a lot of what made the first game a true classic. The most obvious change are the side-scrolling platforming dungeons, something that fundamentally alters the way that you interact with the world of Hyrule. While some fans appreciate Nintendo for experimenting with the Zelda formula, few prefer the side-scrolling action to the overhead questing. That may be the consensus today, but what about back when Zelda II first came out? Well, if you're talking about back in 1988, when The Adventure of Link first hit store shelves, then it's kind of hard to say. There were a very limited amount of gaming magazines at the time, and even fewer of them had anything resembling a real review. The good news is that we can get close thanks entirely to the British press, who reviewed the game in 1990. One of those magazines was The Games Machine, which was not a fan of the changes made to the Zelda sequel. Giving it a 65%, they concluded that The Adventure of Link is certainly immense, a cartographer's paradise in fact. Sprites too are large, but badly defined for their size. A novel addition is the battery pack that allows you to save the game position and thus return later, and at 40 quid it could just have enough content to justify the price. Check out the genre first. Now, if you're looking for the mirror image of that review, then look no further than Ace and their ridiculous 1,000 point scale. Giving Zelda II a score of 901, whatever that means, they praised the game for its lasting value. Console games often fall down a bit in the longevity stakes. Not so with this one. Zelda 2 is as meaty an RPG-style adventure as you're likely to come across. Months of adventuring guaranteed. You know who wasn't bothered by the switch to side-scrolling action? Nintendo Magazine System, that's who. Giving it a score of 94%, The Adventure of Link is one of their highest rated NES games of all time. But instead of focusing on that review, I instead want to draw your attention to the first issue of GMR. Sure, it came out in 2003, some 15 years after Zelda II came out. But I gotta admit, I still did a double take when they gave it an 8 out of 10, a higher score than the 7 that they gave the original Legend of Zelda. The second Zelda was a creative leap, replacing the top-down perspective of the popular original game for side-scrolling fighting and town exploration. Zelda 2 also includes a heavy emphasis on Mario-like platform jumping. While many fans were blown away by the gutsy new direction, others thought it was too different and not like Zelda. Frustratingly, GMR spent more time talking about gamers flying to Canada to buy the game than actually justifying their 8 out of 10 rating. Personally speaking, I think that Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is worth playing all these years later. But there's just no way that it ranks higher than the original. I'm sorry, it just doesn't.
The Legend of Zelda continues. Defeat your enemies and save the kingdom. Beware. Some will help you, others will betray you. I can restore life. I can give magic. I cannot help you. Zelda! Use your sword. Find the crystals. Rescue the princess.
Zelda!
Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes whenever Nintendo adds classic games to their online service. We have a whole playlist full of reviews just like this one. So, do the binge thing that I hear everybody talking about. Now, here's the question I have for you. Is Zelda 2 a classic, or was it a misstep? I want to hear your thoughts on this controversial sequel. Is it actually better than the original, as GMR would have you believe? I can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back next week with a new episode of EGM Ranks. Oh, and speaking of which, we're going to be ranking all of my favorite retro bit packages. I can't wait to do that. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,